Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. My name is Janine Dominguez, and I'm a clinical psychologist at the Child Mind Institute. We're a national nonprofit that supports children and families with gold standard mental health care, advice, and resources, all online and accessible to everyone. You can learn more about the resources we have available for families during the coronavirus crisis, including telehealth evaluations and treatment, by visiting childmind.org/coronavirus and childmind.org/telehealth. Today, I'd like to talk about dealing with college uncertainty, both for parents and young adults, and answer your questions about that and anything else you're wondering about. Post your questions in the feed. We'll also post some links to helpful resources on childmind.org and the details about the next Facebook Live. Remember, we're here every day at 4:30, and we look through questions daily. So I work with many young adults and parents who are trying to cope with the uncertainty of what will be happening in the fall as far as college. In particular, recent high school graduates who are dealing not only with the stress and anxiety of going away for the first time, but also faced with this uncertain time of what's going to happen in the fall. And parents are faced with anxiety about sending teens away and still having the stress about what that's going to look like. Also, if you are staying home, what that's going to look like in terms of virtual learning. Is that the best type of learning for your teen and young adults? And also, if teens are staying home, how do you make this fall semester look like they're moving forward, right? We're wanting them to feel like they've accomplished something big with graduating from high school and also moving forward to college, and also having college students also feel like they're moving forward as well. How do we create that space for independence at home? And how do we also keep in mind the coping ahead again for the fall and what feelings are going to come with that? So a couple things to keep in mind as you're dealing with some of this anxiety and uncertainty. One, when it comes to anxiety, as parents, sometimes good intentions can lead to undesired outcomes. And so what I mean by that is when our kids are faced with an anxiety-provoking situation, with something that's distressing, their anxiety rises and so does ours, and we might engage in some rescuing behavior, making the problem go away, helping them to avoid the problem, helping them to solve the problem. And what that does is certainly lowers their anxiety in the moment and it lowers ours, but unfortunately it might only reinforce more of our rescuing behavior and more of their avoidant behavior. So I want you guys to keep that cycle in mind, and being mindful of that cycle as parents can help us to foster independence for our teens, help them to increase their coping skills as we sort of take a step back and help them to solve some of that uncertainty and sitting with it on their own. So try to encourage and not avoid difficult conversations and being realistic about what the fall is going to look like. So if it truly is going to be virtual, how to make that successful. If you are going to be going onto campus, how to stay safe and healthy, and really just being there as a soundboard for them as they're talking through that. I want you guys to keep in mind that resilience during this time is an ordinary ability. It's actually not an extraordinary ability. We all have the ability to bounce back and get through difficult moments, and so do your teens and young adults. The other thing you might want to practice during this time is really sitting with their emotions and validating. So really not jumping into problem solving, but really just sitting there and say, tell me more. How can I help? Or actually not even help. How can I just sit here and listen and really empathize with what you're going through? So really validating during this time. You want to catch yourself falling into what I'd like to call common thinking traps. So when we're anxious and we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty, our anxious brain can sometimes go to worst possible outcome, predicting the future. It's going to be all terrible. What are we going to do? We're not going to have a plan. And it can sometimes spiral. So really catching yourself in these common thinking traps, sort of helping your teen or young adult also when they're in those thinking traps too, and taking a step back, being in the moment and thinking more realistically about what's happening. How can we just deal with the here and now? And trying to look for some silver linings in that as well. You also want to really guide problem solving. So I like to tell parents and also the young adults I work with is when a problem arises, we can do kind of 5 things with it, really. We can change how we feel about it, which is sometimes hard. We can try to solve it. We can accept it. We can sit in misery and complain about it, or we can react impulsively to how we feel. So we really want to guide some of that problem solving for them, help them to maybe accept some of that uncertainty, but also really cope ahead. We can pick out the things that we have control over and how we're going to do or what we're going to do with that. Maybe creating a pros and cons list for both situations, pros and cons for going off, for the fall semester, or pros and cons for virtual learning and what that's going to mean. So that way it's really laid out and you're really looking at things more objectively. And lastly, in terms of coping ahead too, let's say that your teen's gonna be home and that the fall is going to be virtual. I think it's still a really good idea to talk about what routines are gonna look like. How are you gonna be independent while still living with parents, and making that a different experience. So that way it doesn't just feel like you're living at home, but really how can you be independent? How can you still be connected to your peers at school? How can you create new relationships as well and engage in that? So that way it truly does feel like a different experience. So before actually taking on some questions, and I think this would actually be a good opportunity for me to talk a little bit about the specific programming we have for college age kids. And these are 3 programs that actually can really help with some of the difficulties that college age kids already deal with prior to coronavirus, but can really be helpful, especially during this time too. So we have our social anxiety program, which really helps our college age and young adults deal with some of that anxiety when it comes to asserting needs, when it comes to creating new relationships, really when it comes to doing a lot of things independently in the college world and beyond. So it's a 5-week program. We also have a week-long intensive program in August, and it really helps them in a group format really get through some of that anxiety-provoking situations through practice. We have our college readiness program, which is really for, again, college age kids who are off maybe for the first time or already have been to college but needed to tweak some ability to regulate emotion, ability to plan ahead, ability to get on a really good schedule in terms of sleep and eating, hygiene, exercise. And so this program is really nice in really setting them up for those tools. And it's also in August. It's a week-long intensive. And lastly, we have our college success program. So this is also in August. It's a day-long workshop, but it's for maybe young adults who have some difficulties with executive functioning. So really being able to know what a syllabus looks like, how to plan out your workload. And the nice thing about after the day-long workshop is that you get set up with a coach weekly that you touch base with that can really help keep you organized. So that's also our college success program. So those 3 programs might be really nice for your teen or young adult who may be faced with some challenges as they move forward into the college year. So before I take questions, you are going to hear a short message about our teletherapy, and then we'll be right back.
The Child Mind Institute is a national leader in children's mental health and learning disorders. In the face of the coronavirus pandemic, we are here to support all families. Whether you need help with remote learning, stress management techniques, or support for children who are in distress, the Child Mind Institute is available to help your family cope during this challenging time. We're here for you wherever you are. To request an appointment, visit childmind.org/telehealth.
Welcome back. So again, my name is Janine Dominguez. I'm a clinical psychologist at the Child Mind Institute, and we are here answering questions about the college process starting in the fall, but really about the uncertainty of what's happening in the fall, and hopefully answering some questions that you have about that, how to support your young adults and your teens in moving forward in this process. The plan should be for the college that you're set up to be going to. They should be telling you by June, early July, what the fall is really going to look like and how you can start making some plans for what that's going to look like for you guys as well. So I have a really good question here. It says, my son has been staying up late, sneaks video games. What can I do to get him to listen instead of just putting locks on the TV? That is a really great question. So I think just taking a step back, I would imagine that in part that's probably due to a wacky schedule going on right now. So sometimes when we're home and we don't have the structure of going somewhere, going to school, coming home, having after school activities or whatever else he was engaged in, it might be a little bit easier to sort of stretch out that time on TV, time on video games, where you don't think that you need to like get as much sleep as you do, and you might think that you can sleep later the next morning. And so honestly, the best thing that you can do is maybe have an open conversation with your son. One, around how important certainly sleep is, but two, I think it really is important to stay consistent to a schedule when you decide to go to sleep and when you're deciding to get up. Sort of that consistency is really necessary in order to sort of function during the day. So I think one, it's also helping them to understand and realize that not only does that help in terms of what they need to do with school or whatever else that they have during the day, but really it does also help with them feeling better. So it helps with emotion regulation. It also helps with them staying more alert, staying more connected. I think what I would also say, especially if the video gaming is helping him to stay connected to friends, is maybe acknowledging that too and validating, especially if it feels like it's something that is social to him right now. I think understanding sort of why he's staying up so late and why he's doing so much of it might also help guide that conversation. And if he's saying that it is a way for me to stay connected, then maybe the conversation is around how can we honor that while still putting some boundaries in place so that way you're not losing a ton of sleep or your sleep schedule is completely thrown off where you're sleeping during the day and staying up at night, which isn't healthy either. So again, taking that validation, sitting a step back and asking him where he's coming from might help to sort of guide that conversation as well. But really great question, and one that many parents are faced with today. Another question from Greg. My 16-year-old kid does not reach out to friends. I keep saying you can take walks, sit outside, but no luck. Any suggestions? I think that's a really great question. I would say maybe one, thinking about what your 16-year-old used to do prior to this. I think sometimes when we think about how to keep our teens resilient, we're following a lot of advice, and I think it's wonderful that you're imploring that she reach out to friends, and I think maybe seeing what they used to do, what her friendships were like, might be also a better indication of what she's able to do now. So I think it can It can be a lot of different things. We might slip into assuming it's because she's feeling sad or doesn't want to, but maybe it's because, taking walks or sitting outside isn't the way in which she wants to or can connect with her friends. So maybe taking the conversation and asking what about it seems challenging. How is she keeping in touch with friends too? Maybe they're doing it in different ways, where again, I don't want to go back to video gaming, but I just know a lot of teens who are doing that in a social way. So it might be that way, it might be through chat, it might be in different ways. So they still might be connecting to friends, just not in a way in which we're seeing. I do think that it is helpful to do that also face to face. So I think the encouragement is also a great one. It might just be, it can be a whole host of things. It might be some level of anxiety or social anxiety after not seeing people for a bit. Just being able to see them for the first time and taking walks might be anxiety provoking. So again, asking some questions. What's the worst case scenario? What's keeping you stuck? Might be a way in which you can problem solve some of that out. And just start with small steps too. That's my other suggestion. There might be a person that they really feel really connected to, and so you might be suggesting that first before moving on to other people as well. But it might be that the social anxiety program, for example, might be a good sort of outlet for your teen in helping them to be connected to other peers, especially if this is something that's causing them to feel anxious as well. A really good question. Again, just wanted to say, I'm Janine Dominguez, if you're just tuning in, clinical psychologist at the Child Mind Institute, and we're answering questions about next year, college, the uncertainty of what the fall brings, but also really how to overall deal with the continued stress and anxiety of COVID-19 and how to keep our teens connected to one another as well. I had another really great question. My daughter has ADHD and is weighing the pros and cons of taking a gap year. Since college won't be starting in the fall as we planned, I'm inclined to tell her to go for it. My concern is that without structure, she'll stall out. The year will be lost. What can we do to help make it productive? I think this is an excellent question. I think it's one that many parents and actually teens are faced with if the fall semester or the year does go virtual, should we, if we have the ability, defer and take a year off or take a gap year? So I probably won't have like the greatest answer for this because I think it really depends on your kid. I think you know them well, and it depends on their needs, their level of learning, and their ability to learn virtually. I think there's certainly ways of making even virtual learning, even with your daughter who has ADHD, possible and productive. I will say a gap year or a deferred year is one that requires a lot of planning. And so I only say that because if already you're worried about virtual learning not having enough structure in it, then deferring a year and having a gap year would need a ton of structure to making it productive. And so not to dissuade that the gap year, but it does take a lot of planning and potentially with the level of uncertainty that's happening with the fall, even with college and virtual learning, I'm not sure how much of that planning could go into place currently right now. So it might be a good idea to still weigh out the pros and cons of deferring a year or really, taking that virtual year in the fall and making it productive and still making it work, because the spring semester might be in full swing on a college campus and still giving her the structure that she needs. So that's all to say it might still take a little time in pre-planning now before sort of like giving her the green light and saying, yes, let's take a gap year, but really seeing what the pros and cons are. Really good question. So one other question. my 13-year-old daughter has been recently diagnosed with ADHD. It has been incredibly difficult to have her stay focused and structured on the new online schedule. I hear you. Finding the balance and getting more support from school will take time. We are being patient and see how the medications can help. Any suggestion or resources on ADHD during the lockdown in school? Yes, so I would certainly recommend actually going to our website, childmind.org/coronavirus. There are certainly links there, particularly on how to support kids with learning difficulties, including ADHD. And also you can go and look at childmind.org/telehealth as well, because there are other resources and free tools there that can really be helpful in keeping to structure. It sounds like you guys are doing a brilliant job in trying to balance that out and getting supports from school. Really how to not get burned out yourself as parents as well. But there's also some really great suggestions and resources on how to supplement some of the things that you're getting from school too. I think that certainly with ADHD, virtual learning can be a challenge, and also know that there are great resources and accommodations that can be put in place too. But the fact that you're asking and already reaching out to the school and taking the time, you're just be assured that you're taking all the right steps already and doing what you can do in this moment. So really great question. So I think that might be a good time for us to wrap up. These were all really great questions about just how to support your teens during this time. I know the fall still brings a lot of uncertainty. This was more about college, but certainly uncertainty on all levels in terms of school. So you guys are all doing an amazing job as parents, I'm sure of it. I want to thank you all again for joining me. I hope it was helpful, and remember, we're here every day at 4:30 and we look through questions daily. Check the post for the topic of our next live. The Child Mind Institute is here to help with the mental health and parenting needs of this coronavirus crisis, no matter where you are. We have resources to help, from daily tips to consultation to gold standard telehealth treatments. Go to childmind.org/coronavirus or childmind.org/telehealth. Be safe, and thank you.